Hi. Good day, everyone. I pray that everyone is in the best of health. All right, today we shall continue with our lecture on nutrition. We are going to start with water-soluble vitamins. As the name suggests, these vitamins can be dissolved in water. They are carried out to the body's tissue but are not stored in them. They are typically found in plants and animal foods and must be taken daily. Vitamin C and members of the vitamin B complex are what we call as water-soluble vitamins. Now, vitamin C, or ascorbic acid, is a neutrally charged molecule. It can be protonated and become ascorbate, depending on the pH of the medium in which it is located. Ascorbic acid may lose the hydrogen ions attached to one of its ionizable groups, thus generating ascorbate monoionic or diionic. Now, vitamin C is labile in nature, which makes it easily destroyed by oxygen, metal ions, increasing pH, heat, and light. Biosynthesis of vitamin C is possible only in plants and animals. Now, vitamin C functions as a co-substrate for several enzymes that are important for the functioning of the organism. Its activity as an antioxidant includes the ability to reversibly oxidize to ascorbyl radical and then to dehydroascorbate. Vitamin C is also found to be involved in neuronal differentiation, maturation, and survival, as well as wound healing. Again, like studies have also found the benefits of vitamin C on your skin in terms of both photoprotection, similarly as wound healing to neuronal cells. All right. Now, ascorbate enters the enterocytes via the SVCT and the GLUT transporters. The absorption pattern of ascorbate is typically opposite to that of glucose. Ascorbate is better absorbed in the ileum of the small intestine, but in much smaller quantities in the duodenum. One of the hypotheses holds that the idea that the epithelial enterocytes and renal proximal tubule cells would swell when typically transporting a certain number of metabolites. Now, this process could activate volume-sensitive anion channels, or VSAC, which is typically located on the basolateral membrane. This would allow the secretion or exit of the ascorbate from inside the cell. Furthermore, I should add that vitamin C typically gets transferred into the bloodstream by diffusion through discontinuities of the endothelial wall. In cases like in instances in the renal glomeruli, ascorbate in the blood gets filtered in the urine. So, despite the fact that depending on the vitamin C status of a person, a large proportion gets reabsorbed back along the proximal tubules, and the organs with the highest concentration of ascorbate are the adrenal glands, the brain, and the liver. And in terms of size, is the skeletal muscle. Okay. Now, vitamin C is involved in the maintenance of body functions. It acts as a cofactor for the enzymes that stabilize the collagen molecule tertiary structure. It promotes collagen gene expression as well. It is also found to be involved in both tyrosine and tryptophan metabolism. Vitamin C also acts as a free radical scavenger. It is capable of inactivating toxic oxygen radicals, typically arise from normal metabolism and by direct exposure to sunlight, ozone, smoking, and other pollutants. In iron metabolism, it helps by reducing ferric to the ferrous form of iron and enhances the iron absorption from the intestines. Okay. Now, deficiency of vitamin C in humans causes major diseases called scurvy. It typically leads to impaired wound healing, edema, hemorrhage in the skin, mucous membranes, internal organs and muscles, weakening of the collagenous structure in the bone, the cartilage, teeth, and connective tissues. Those who suffer from scurvy typically shows swollen or bleeding gums, and this is associated with tooth loss. They show they come off as lethargic, usually fatigue. They experience rheumatic atrophy, skin lesions, hematomas in the thighs. In cases of children, the syndrome is called Mueller-Barlow disease, as seen in typically non-breastfed infants at about 6 months. And you can see in these babies a widening of their bone cartilage boundaries. They have stressed epiphyseal cartilage in the extremities, severe joint pain, anemia, and as well as fever. Children having this disease usually typically presented with a limp or inability to walk, and they have very tender lower limbs. Okay? So that's pretty much for vitamin C. Now, the vitamin B complex is typically synthesized in plants. They perform the same cellular functions in plants as do their role in the animals that consume them. There are no storage forms in the body, as any excess will be secreted in the urine. They are also involved in a substantial proportion of enzymatic processes. They are not grouped based on chemical structure similarity, but water solubility and interrelated cellular coenzyme functions. Okay? Right, so vitamin B complex is made up of thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, pyridoxine, folic acid, cobalamin, biotin, and pantothenic acid. Now, thiamine, the first one, exists in a free unphosphorylated form, as well in the form of 3 phosphate esters. You have the monophosphate, pyrophosphate, and triphosphate. At physiological concentrations, thiamine uptake by epithelial cells is done through protein carriers. At high levels, on the other hand, uptake is mediated by passive diffusion. The primary site for the uptake of thiamine is in the intestinal walls, where it gets absorbed as a charged form before being transferred to the blood. It is also the place where the conversion of thiamine to thiamine triphosphate is made possible. Okay. Now, you have thiamine cations that are initially absorbed in the intestines. Once in the intestine, it gets phosphorylated to thiamine triphosphate. It gets transported by transport enzymes, migrating passively through the membrane and absorbed through the channels. Once in the blood, plasma, erythrocyte, leukocyte, and other blood components absorb thiamine cation, passive or actively, and then transport it to other tissues and organs. Now, in muscle tissues, thiamine is absorbed in the cells and gets converted to pyrophosphate form that is involved in sugar metabolism. In the kidneys, your renal cells, on the other hand, thiamine exists in all 3 forms. Thiamine is key in sugar metabolism, conversion to the cationic form of urinary secretion. In the nerve system, thiamine is involved in sugar metabolism as well. They are involved in membrane conductance and regulation of neuronal communications. Thiamine in other organ tissue, they are typically again involved in sugar metabolism, maintenance functions, intracellular communications. So ultimately, secretion of thiamine is determined by excess concentrations of thiamine substrates, as well as the half-life of thiamine-containing enzyme, which determines the rates of secretion. Now, the deficiency of thiamine leads to a series of conditions related to complications with nerve and brain system development, energy metabolism, digestion, cell proliferation, and cell cycle activity in many processes in the body. If a thiamine deficiency exists, the lactic acid concentration increases, leading to a decrease in pH and cell death, which has several implications in humans, including learning and memory deficits, the lack of appetite, changes in your heart rate and blood pressure, motor cortex activity and coordination, as well as other neuromechanical defects. Now, the Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome is a disorder of the brain caused by the deficiency of thiamine. It is typically characterized by an acute onset of some or all of an eye movement disorder, lack of voluntary coordination of muscle or ataxia, confusion. Now, patients may die in the acute phase, but many survivors go on to develop permanent memory impairment. Now, alcohol abuse is an important cause of Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, although it is not the only consideration. Heavy drinking may lead to particular problems with uptake of thiamine from the diet. All right. Now, the second condition that can be seen of those with thiamine deficiency is beriberi. Now, it is a form of condition typically seen in patients, again, like low in thiamine levels. There are two types. You have the wet and dry beriberi. The former affects the heart and circulatory system. And in extreme cases, the former can cause heart failure. Dry beriberi, on the other hand, damages the nerves and can lead to decreased muscle strength and eventually muscle paralysis. Now, these are the causes of deficiency in both mild and extreme cases. These cases are commonly found in chronic alcoholics, old-age patients, and in individuals with GIT diseases or gastrointestinal diseases. All right. Now, riboflavin, again, is a water-soluble vitamin, and it is a heat-stable vitamin that the body uses to metabolize fats, protein, and carbohydrates into glucose for energy. In addition to boosting energy, riboflavin functions as an antioxidant for the proper functions of the immune system, healthy skin, and hair. Now, the effects of riboflavin is made possible with the help of two coenzymes. You have the flavin mononucleotides and flavin adenine dinucleotide, so FMN and FAD. Now, without an adequate amount of riboflavin, micronutrients like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins cannot be digested and maintained in the body. Now, following dietary protein denaturation, the vitamin is released from the non-covalently bound cofactors by phosphotases and phosphatases located in the brush border membrane of the intestinal epithelium. Now, free riboflavin is then transported in the enterocyte through carrier-mediated processes. Once in the intestinal in the intestinal cell, it goes ATP-dependent phosphorylation to form FMN, most of which is further converted to FAD. All right, free riboflavin available for being transported through the basolateral membrane of the enterocyte into the plasma. Now, there is little or no storage of riboflavin in the body. Any surplus intake which overcomes the capacity of renal absorption is eliminated in the urine in the form of riboflavin. Okay. Now, the deficiency of riboflavin is particularly common in developing countries. This is found in alcoholics, women who uses birth control pills. For this case, is because that is due to the fact that the body cannot absorb much riboflavin when on birth control pills. Riboflavin deficiency can be related to many developmental abnormalities, such as patients with cleft lip and palate, growth retardation, and even cardiac disease. Now, pregnant and lactating women specifically, and people with Brown, Violetto-von Lehr syndrome, BVVL, and vegan people are at risk of riboflavin deficiency. Severe riboflavin deficiency can diminish levels of FAD and FMN, and this would affect the metabolism of other nutrients, especially other B vitamins. All right. Now, moving on to niacin, it is typically obtained from the diet in the form of tryptophan, nicotinic acid, and nicotinamide. Nicotinic acid is the basic precursor of the food chain made by plants and algae, while nicotinamide is a degradation product of pyridine dinucleotides and is the predominant form of vitamin B3 that is absorbed in the animal-based food. Its active form is nicotinamide, a derivative of nicotinic acid that contains an amide group instead of the carboxyl group. Now, dietary nicotinic acid is converted to NAD+ in the intestine or liver and released into the systematic circulation as nicotinamide through the action of NAD glycohydrolysis. NAD+ can be phosphorylated to NADP+, and both of these can accept electrons to form NADH and NADPH or participate in redox metabolism. Most tissues express transporters for nicotinamide to obtain niacin for intracellular functions. Now, deficiency of niacin can be caused by malabsorption, high levels of corn-based diet, and alcoholism. Pellagra is the human disease of niacin deficiency, which means rough skin in Italian. The problem arose from over-dependence of corn. If you eat too much corn, and a loss of traditional alkaline processing techniques which were required to make the nicotinic acid available in corn. Now, pellagra is a dramatic disease with severe sun sensitivity of the skin, schizophrenia like dementia, diarrhea which worsens nutrient status, and eventually death. Okay? Now, in contrast, niacin at high doses inhibits lipolysis in adipose tissue. The liver typically utilizes these fatty acids as a major precursor for triacylglycerol synthesis. Niacin causes a decrease in triacylglycerol levels required for VLDL formation. LDL is derived from VLDL, therefore in this circumstance, both plasma triacylglycerol and cholesterol are affected. Niacin is particularly useful to treat type 2b hyperlipoproteinemia, where both VLDL and LDL are elevated. Okay? Now, for pantothenic acid, it's just only this one slide. It comes from the word panto, meaning everywhere. Nearly all food contains small quantities of pantothenic acid. The main function of this water-soluble vitamin is in the synthesis of coenzyme A or CoA and acyl carrier protein. Now, CoA is essential for fatty acid synthesis and degradation, transfer of acetyl and acyl groups, and a multitude of other anabolic and catabolic processes. Acyl carrier, on the other hand, plays a key role in fatty acid synthesis. Now, because some pantothenic acid is present in almost all foods, a deficiency is rare except in people with severe malnutrition. When someone has a pantothenic acid deficiency, it is usually accompanied by deficiency in other nutrients, making it difficult to identify the effects that are specific to pantothenic acid. Now, based on the experience of prisoner of war in World War II and studies of diets lacking pantothenic in conjunction with administration of antagonists of pantothenic metabolism, a deficiency is associated with numbness and burning of the hands and feet, headache, fatigue, irritability, restlessness, disturbed sleep, gastrointestinal disturbances with anorexia. Okay? All right. Now, vitamin B6 is a very important compound for general cellular metabolism. It has been implicated as a cofactor in more than 100 biochemical reactions in the cell. Even though most co-catalyzed reactions are related to amino acid biosynthesis and catabolism, Vitamin B6 also contributes to fatty acid biosynthesis, breakdown of storage compounds, as well as biosynthesis of plant hormones, neurotransmitters, and organelle-specific compounds. Now, vitamin B6 is a collective term for the derivatives of pyridine, pyridoxine, pyridoxal, and pyridoxamine. All of these compounds are precursors for pyridoxal phosphate that is key in catalytic reactions involving fatty acid and amino acid. Vitamin B6 is predominantly absorbed in the intestine and is metabolized at the cellular level in the mitochondria and cytosol to its active form in the liver. Excretion of excess of this particular vitamin occurs in the kidneys and is typically albumin bound in the plasma. Now, vitamin B6 deficiency is rare in isolation and usually found in association with other B vitamin deficiencies such as folic acid and vitamin B12. Low plasma levels of active B6 are found in chronic alcohol dependence with OB states, pregnancy, preeclampsia and eclampsia, and malabsorptive states such as celiac, IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, and bariatric surgery. Additional at-risk groups with inadequate intake or increased metabolic requirements may become functionally deficient in vitamin B6. Now, included in this group are those with renal impairment, autoimmune disorder, and chronic alcohol use, patients with chronic renal failure or renal impairment, especially those receiving hemodialysis, have low plasma levels of B6. Autoimmune disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis have increased catabolism of B6, resulting in higher demand for dietary supplementation of B6. Vitamin B6 deficiency may present with seizures in the young. Severely deficient adults commonly present with rashes and mental status changes. Additional clinical findings of deficiency may include normocytic anemia, a non-specific pruritic rash, cheilitis with scaly lip skin and cracks in the corner of the mouth, glossitis or swelling of the tongue. Now, depression is associated with a severe B6 deficiency as well. Deficiency has also been observed in newborns with formulas low in vitamin B6, women taking oral contraceptives, and alcoholics. Isoniazid is a drug typically used to treat tuberculosis, can induce vitamin B6 deficiency by forming an inactive derivative of the pyridoxal phosphate. All right. Now, biotin, vitamin B7, is a water-soluble vitamin required by all organisms owing to its essential role in carboxylation reactions. Highest level of biotin is typically found in organ meats like liver and kidney, but is low in red meat, but mostly in vegetables and fruits. Okay. Now, dietary biotin is present in two forms, free and protein-bound. The protein-bound form, in which the vitamin is covalently bound to polypeptides through lysine residue, is degraded by digestive proteases called biotinidase. This would allow its absorption in a sodium-dependent manner in the enterocyte. Now, the mechanism of transport to date in terms of its absorption, the mechanism of transport to other tissues to date is actually poorly understood. So studies are still ongoing on this. All right. Now, in humans, there are 5 biotin-dependent carboxylases. You have propionyl-CoA carboxylase. You have the methylcrotonyl-CoA carboxylase, the pyruvic carboxylase, and 2 other forms of acetyl-CoA carboxylase. Now, these enzymes catalyze key reactions in gluconeogenesis, fatty acid metabolism, amino acid catabolism. This, typically shows that biotin plays an essential role in pretty much a lot of metabolic homeostasis, okay, and maintaining metabolic homeostasis. Now, biotin deficiency is rare given its wide distribution in food. However, increased consumption of raw egg white to the diet as a source of protein will induce symptoms of biotin deficiency, including dermatitis, glossitis, loss of appetite, and nausea. Raw egg white contains avidin, which will bind tightly to biotin, and this would prevent absorption in the intestines. Okay. Now, folic acid is a water-soluble vitamin that helps the body make healthy new cells. It is crucial for proper brain functioning. It also plays an important role in mental and emotional health. Now, folic acid works closely with vitamin B12 in making red blood cells, and it helps iron function properly in the body. Now, folic acid with vitamin B6 and B12 and other nutrients are involved in controlling the blood levels of the amino acid homocysteine. Okay. Now, folic acid is biochemically inactive. It is converted to dihydrofolate reductase. It is converted by dihydrofolate reductase to tetrahydrofolic acid and methyl tetrahydrofolate. These folic acid congeners are transported by receptor-mediated endocytosis across cells where they are needed. Okay. Now, there are a number of key roles of folic acid. I will go through them. Folic acid is involved in, again, several metabolic cycles. The first cycle is histidine cycle. In this particular cycle, the deamination of histidine in the presence of folic acid results in the generation of urocanic acid. Now, urocanic acid is involved in many metabolic processes to generate FIGLU or formiminoglutamate, and is involved in generating glutamate. So, in folic acid deficiency, the catabolism of FIGLU is impaired and glutamate cannot be generated. Therefore, this compound, FIGLU, formiminoglutamate, accumulates in the blood and is secreted in an elevated amount in the urine. Glutamic acid is an important substance in the metabolic processes of sugars and fats and is involved in the process of potassium transportation. It plays a vital role in learning, memorizing in the brain, stuff like that. Okay, so that goes for histidine. Now, for serine and glycine pathway, folic acid plays a vital role by providing hydroxymethyl group to glycine residues to produce serine. In cases of folic acid deficiency, glycine loses its ability to produce serine. This would lead to many problems such as improper functioning of the brain, the central nervous system. In many processes inside the body, the impairment of RNA and DNA functions can also occur. Fat and fatty acid metabolism and muscle formation. Serine is also needed in the production of tryptophan, the amino acid that is involved in making serotonin, a mood-determining brain chemical. A low level of either serotonin or tryptophan has been linked to depression, confusion, insomnia, and even anxiety. Now, thirdly, folate is also known to play a vital role in methionine cycle. It is involved as a 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate methionine in the methylation process, where the methyl group is transferred to homocysteine to form methionine in the presence of methionine synthase enzyme. In cases of folic acid deficiency, the body cannot produce methionine, which leads to many problems such as low production of natural antioxidant, glutathione, and sulfur-containing amino acids such as taurine and cysteine. And these are all involved in eliminating toxins inside the body, building a strong and healthy tissues, as well as promoting cardiovascular health. All right? Now, furthermore, folic acid are used in 2 reaction steps of the de novo biosynthesis of purine. Purine has many important roles in cell growth, division, and development, since it is considered to be along with the pyrimidine base of the DNA helix. So in cases of folate deficiency, there is an impairment of functions of purine, which means there would be an impairment in the production of DNA, and this would lead many problems inside the body, since the DNA is the basis of every process. Okay. Now, folic acid deficiency typically negatively affects the body. The most common diseases that are caused as a result of folic acid deficiency are megaloblastic anemia and birth defects. Megaloblastic anemia is described as the presence of large-sized red blood cells than normal. It results from the inhibition of DNA synthesis due to the impairment of DNA replication within the red blood cell production. When DNA synthesis is impaired, the cell cycle cannot progress from the G2 stage to the mitosis stage, and this would lead to continuing cell growth without division, which presents as microcytosis. Okay, now it can be a result of vitamin B12 or folic acid deficiency, and also due to trapping folate, preventing it from doing its normal function. This defect is caused by thymidylate synthesis defective with deoxyuridine triphosphate enlargement. Now, megaloblastic anemia leads to impairment of the red blood cell, painful tingling of the hands and feet, gastrointestinal problems, the diarrhea, the feeling of being tired, changes in taste and perception, fatigue, and weaknesses, loss of coordination, decreased appetite, as well as weight loss. Okay. Now, folate deficiency arises when there is an increased demand during pregnancy and lactation. Early fetal development of the neural tube is critically dependent on the presence of folic acid. Adequate folate nutrition must occur. Adequate folate nutrition must occur at the time of conception, because critical folate-dependent development occurs in the first weeks of life. Taking folate during pregnancy reduces the risk of getting pregnancy affected by spinous bifida and other neural tube defects. Okay, so quite a lengthy one for cobalamin, but I hope you guys remember. Okay, now cobalamin or vitamin B12 is the most chemically complex of all vitamins. Cobalamin is stored in the liver. It cannot be made by plants or animals. Only bacteria and archaea are the types of organisms that have the enzymes required for the synthesis of cobalamin. Now, it is naturally found in foods including meat, especially liver and shellfish, eggs, and milk products. Okay. Now, vitamin B12 is used by the body in two forms, either as methylcobalamin or 5-deoxyadenosine cobalamin. The enzyme methionine synthase needs methylcobalamin as a cofactor. This enzyme is normally involved in the conversion of the amino acid homocysteine into methionine, while methionine in turn is required for DNA methylation. 5-deoxyadenosine, on the other hand, is a cofactor needed by the enzyme that converts methylmalonyl-CoA to succinyl-CoA. This conversion is an important step in the extraction of energy from proteins and fat. Other succinyl-CoA is necessary for the production of hemoglobin, a substance that carries the oxygen in the red blood cell. Now, vitamin B12 is readily absorbed in the last part of the small intestine, which leads to the large intestine. However, to be absorbed, the vitamin must combine with intrinsic factor, a protein produced in the stomach. Without intrinsic factor, vitamin B12 moves through the intestine and is excreted in the stool. Food-bound cobalamin is released in the stomach with the help of peptic activity, which is subsequently bound by heptacorin. In the small intestine, cobalamin is released from haptocorin by pancreatic protease digestion and bound by an intrinsic factor to form the IF or intrinsic factor cobalamin complex. The IF cobalamin complex passes through the small intestine where it is bound on the apical surface of ileal epithelial cells by a receptor composed of a heterodimer, which aids in the endocytosis of IF cobalamin. Once inside the cell, the complex is degraded by the lysosomes and cobalamin is released in the cytosol. If then gets released into the bloodstream, cobalamin binds to either haptocorin, or transcobalamin and gets taken up into cells through receptor mediated endocytosis. Okay. So this schematic here, I won't expect you to remember all of it, but just to give you an idea of how B12 is metabolized and how in some sense it is related to folic acid. Okay? All right. Okay. Now, cobalamin plays a vital role in the conversion of homocysteine to methionine in the methionine cycle, since it takes the methyl group from 5-methyl tetrahydrofluorate. Can't got my tongue. Right, okay. So, cobalamin plays a vital role in the conversion of homocysteine to methionine in the methionine cycle, since it takes the methyl group from 5-methyl tetrahydrofluorate folic acid and forms methylcobalamin, which then releases this methyl group to convert homocysteine into methionine. Okay. Moreover, cobalamin is needed in the conversion of the methionine to homocysteine, where methionine is converted to SAM product in the presence of ATP by methionine adenosyl transferase. Okay. Now, in the case of beta-12 vitamin deficiency, the body cannot produce methionine, which leads to many problems. The defective production of SAM product leads to an impairment in the synthesis of carnitine, impairment of neural function, myelin maintenance, and lack of DNA and RNA methylation. Okay? All right. We're done with water-soluble vitamins. Okay, there has been a mix-up in terms of the slides and what I'm actually saying. I apologize for that. Okay, if you're not sure, you can always email me back. Okay, thank you. So moving on to lipid-soluble vitamins. All right, so fat-soluble vitamins are the most abundant in high-fat foods and are much better absorbed into the bloodstream when you eat them with fats. Okay, there are 4 types, 4 fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K. All right. The 4 types of we're going to go to vitamin A first. There are 4 types of vitamin A. Retinol is the primary alcohol containing a beta ion ring with an unsaturated side chain. It is typically found in animal tissues as a retinal ester with long-chain fatty acid. Retinal is an aldehyde derived from the oxidation of retinol. Retinoic acid is an acid derived from the oxidation of retinal. Retinoic acid cannot be reduced in the body, therefore it cannot give rise to either retinal or retinol. Now, beta-carotene, on the other hand, is derived from plants. It can be oxidatively cleaved in the intestine to yield 2 molecules of retinal. Okay, now the majority of the dietary vitamin A from both plants and animal sources is digested and absorbed in the intestines. Now, retinol esters in the diet are hydrolyzed in the intestinal mucosa, releasing retinol and free fatty acids. Retinol derived from esters and cleavage and reduction of carotenes is re-esterified and secreted as components of kilomicrons into the lymphatic system. Now, upon arrival at the extrahepatic cells, kilomicrons are hydrolyzed to produce kilomicron remnants. Now, these remnants gets taken up by the hepatocytes, where retinyl esters are again hydrolyzed into retinol. Now, excessive retinol is re-esterified and stored as retinyl esters in hepatic stellate cells, where it is incorporated into lipid droplets. When needed, it is released and transported by retinol plasma binding protein to extrahepatic tissue. The retinol RBP complex shall be attached to specific receptors on the surface of many cells of peripheral tissues. Now, many tissues contain a cellular retinol binding protein that carries retinol to the sites in the nucleus, where it acts in a manner analogous to steroid hormones. This is as seen in the figure on your right. Okay. Now, vitamin A is involved in the typical visual cycle. The neural components of the retina consist of three principal cell layers. You have the photoreceptor cells, the bipolar cells, and the ganglion cells. The visual pigment of the rods is called rhodopsin, which consists of 11 cis-retinals specifically bound to the protein opsin. Now, enzymatically processing within the visual cycle typically begins with the delivery of vitamin A and all trans retinol from the blood circulation into the retinal pigment epithelium. Upon entry into the RPE, the retinal pigment epithelium, all trans retinol gets converted to retinal ester forms. The resulting all-trans-retinal ester pool represents a storage form of vitamin A upon the RPE65, upon which RPE65 acts to generate 11-cis-retinol. Okay, now 11-cis-retinol are oxidized by an 11-cis-specific retinol dehydrogenase to form visual chromophore 11-cis-retinal. Okay, now 11-cis-retinal is delivered to rod and cone outer segments, where it combines with opsins to form rhodopsin. Okay, just what I mentioned earlier. Now, light activation of rhodopsin initiates visual transduction processes and liberates all transretinal as a photoproduct. This process triggers nerve impulse that is transmitted by the optic nerve to the brain. Reduction of all transretinal via all transretinal dehydrogenase produces all transretinal, which is transferred back to the RPE for recycling. Okay. All right. Now, vitamin A is also involved in growth. Studies have found that vitamin A is necessary for the expression of genes involved in the human growth. Development of the human embryo is controlled in different processes where retinol and other retinoic acid isoforms are involved. It is also found to be involved in several other functions, including physical, biological barriers on the skin, as well as differentiation and maturation of epithelial cells and mucus secretion. It is also found to be involved in both adaptive and innate immunity and spermatogenesis, where it supports spermatogenesis in male and preventing female resorption, fetal resorption in female. Okay, now night blindness is the earliest sign of vitamin A deficiency. Prolonged deficiency leads to irreversible loss in the number of visual cells. Severe deficiency leads to xerophthalmia, a pathologic dryness of the conjunctiva and cornea. If left untreated, it will result in corneal ulceration and ultimately blindness. Furthermore, dermatologic problems, including psoriasis and acne, are also an indication of a deficiency in vitamin A. This can be treated with retinoic acid or its derivatives. As mentioned previously, vitamin A plays a vital role in the immune system. Deficiency in this vitamin increased the risk of developing an ear infection, UTI, hyperkeratosis, and several other complications. Now, while the slide is not here, I would like to add that the population with high consumption of beta-carotene shows decreased incidence of heart disease and lung and skin cancer. The protective effect may be due to antioxidant properties and as well as enhancement of the immune system or immune function. All right. Now, in cases of excessive intake of vitamin A, it will lead to a condition called hypervitaminosis. This typically occurs if you consume, more than 7.5 mg per day, and it is toxic. Early signs of overconsumption may include dermatitis, enlarged liver, which typically leads to cirrhosis, severe headache and hyperirritability, vomiting, bone decalcification, and especially for pregnant women, low levels of vitamin A can potentially cause congenital malformations in developing fetus. Okay? Now, moving on to the second fat-soluble vitamin, which is vitamin D. It typically regulates the metabolism of calcium and phosphate, specifically for bone remodeling. It can be obtained from either diet or synthesized from cholesterol precursors. The D2 form of vitamin D or ergocalciferol can be found in plants, while D3 cholecalciferol can be found in liver oils of fish, egg yolk, and fortified milk. Now, D2 and D3 are not the biologically active form, but they are converted in vivo to the active form. Now, the third form is calcitriol. Now, this is the biologically active form of vitamin D. It is made possible by the initial conversion of the 7-hydroxycholesterol to cholecalciferol among the exposure of UV light in your skin. Now, cholecalciferol is the predominant form in the plasma and also the major storage form. Okay. Now, initially, dietary vitamin D binds to the VDBP or the vitamin D binding protein in circulation, and it gets delivered to the liver. Okay. Now, in the liver, hydroxylation of vitamin D3 results in the formation of calcidiol. This then gets transported again via the VDBP to the kidney before being internalized by megalin, a transmembrane surface receptor of the DBP. Now, calcidiol is further metabolized to produce calcitriol. Now, following this would allow calcitriol to enter the circulation and gets delivered to the target tissues. This allows for the regulation or absorption of This would allow the regulation of absorption or reabsorption of both calcium and phosphate to occur in these tissues. Now, understand that the overall function of vitamin D is to maintain adequate supply or adequate levels of calcium in the plasma. This can be achieved through increasing the uptake of calcium by the intestine, minimizing loss of calcium by the kidney, or stimulating the resorption of the bone when necessary. Now, human deficiency of vitamin D can cause a condition called rickets. In children, it is characterized by the continued formation of the collagen matrix, but with incomplete mineralization resulting in soft, pliable bones. Renal rickets, on the other hand, results from chronic renal failure where the formation of an active form of vitamin D was not produced sufficiently. This can be circumvented through replacement therapy of calcitriol. Osteomalacia is much more common in adult, where demineralization of pre-existing bones increases the susceptibility to fracture. Lastly, insufficient exposure to daylight and or deficiency in vitamin D consumption can cause predominantly in infants as well as the elderly. Okay, excess of vitamin D can be super toxic. It is the most toxic of all vitamins. While it can be stored, it is, however, slowly metabolized. Now, excess intake can cause loss of appetite, nausea, thirst, and stupor. Furthermore, enhanced calcium absorption and bone resorption or hypercalcemia can lead to deposits of calcium buildup in many organs, particularly in the arteries and kidneys. Okay? All right. Now, vitamin E, on the other hand, is widely distributed antioxidant in nature. It consists of 8 naturally occurring forms, tocopherols and tocotrienols, in their alpha, beta, gamma, and delta forms. Its classical functions are to protect against lipid peroxidation in membranes, the non-enzymatic terminator of free radical chain reactions, and as well as pro-oxidant activities. Now, vitamin E requirement increases as the intake of polyunsaturated fatty acid increases. Okay. Now, in general sense, the transport of vitamin E in the blood circulation follows largely that of cholesterol within the lipoprotein metabolism. From the liver, vitamin E is carried by the very low density lipoproteins and stored in the adipose tissues. The transport of vitamin E is independent of the type of stereoisomers. Any malfunctions in lipoproteins and lipid metabolism can cause a deficiency in vitamin E. All right. Now, vitamin E deficiency is rare for adults, as most, if not all, cases are entirely restricted to premature infants. However, in cases where it is seen in adults, it is typically associated with defective absorption or transport. The signs are increased sensitivity of erythrocyte to peroxide, and the presence of abnormal cellular membrane. Okay. It's least toxic again. No toxicity has ever been observed at doses as high as 300 mg per day. Okay. All right. Now, the last vitamin that we're going to cover is vitamin K. It was first identified in a study of blood coagulation. The K itself stands for coagulation, a Danish term for coagulation. There are 2 types, K1 and K2. Phylloquinone, or K1, is generally synthesized by plants. Menaquinone, or K2, is synthesized from bacteria. Now, in terms of therapy, a synthetic derivative of vitamin K, menadione, is typically applied. Okay. Now, vitamin K is an anti-hemorrhagic dietary factor that is key in the synthesis of 4 procoagulant factor, 2, 4, 9, and 10. Following secretion in the blood, these 4 vitamin K-dependent proteins become available to participate in blood coagulation. The formation of clotting factors requires the vitamin K-dependent carboxylation of glutamic acid residue into the mature clotting factor that contains carboxyglutamate. This translational modification is essential for the biological activity of VKD proteins. Okay, vitamin K dependent proteins. Now, the formation of carboxyglutamate is inhibited by dicumarol and warfarin. A true deficiency is unusual because amounts are generally produced by intestinal bacteria or derived from the diet. In an unfortunate circumstance, bacterial population in the gut is decreased. This will lead to hypoprothrombinemia in the marginally malnourished individuals. To circumvent this, supplementation of vitamin K will correct the bleeding tendency. All right. Now, have you ever wondered why newborns have to be injected with vitamin K? Now, the vitamin K status of the newborn is typically fragile. There is a window from birth to about 6 months of life where they are exposed to a small but potentially life-threatening risk of bleeding. Newborns have sterile intestines and cannot synthesize vitamin K. Human milk from the mother usually provides about 1/5 of daily requirement. So it is recommended that newborns are to receive a single intramuscular dose of vitamin K. Now, prolonged administration of large doses of vitamin K can produce hemolytic anemia and jaundice in the infant. Okay, so that's one useful tip for you guys to remember in the labor room. Now, with that, we end our lecture on nutrition. If you have further inquiries, please please email me directly. I'm more than happy to entertain your questions. I will try to answer them as much. I will try to help you as much as possible. If anything, do drop and give me a shout. Yeah. Thank you and have a pleasant day. Good day. Have a good one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.